Fame doesn't protect you. Money doesn't protect you. And unfortunately, neither does talent. Over the last 5 years, the world has watched some of the most iconic, beloved, and celebrated figures in entertainment be ripped away without warning. Some from secrets they kept hidden for years, others from scandals that only surfaced after they were already gone. These aren't just deaths. They're stories. Each one has a twist, a mystery, or a truth that most people still don't fully know. So before we get into this list, understand, some of what you're about to hear will genuinely surprise you. Let's get into it. #10. Kobe Bryant, January 26, 2020. It was a foggy Sunday morning in Calabasas, California. Kobe Bryant, 5-time NBA champion, Oscar winner, husband, father, boarded a private helicopter with his 13-year-old daughter Gianna and 7 others. They were headed to a youth basketball tournament. They never arrived. The helicopter slammed into a hillside at nearly 200 miles per hour. There were no survivors. In an instant, one of the most legendary athletes who ever lived was gone. What made it so devastating wasn't just Kobe, it was Gianna, his daughter, who had inherited his fire for the game and was widely expected to carry that legacy forward. The news broke while the Grammys were live on air that evening. Artists openly wept on stage. NBA arenas went silent mid-game. Vigils appeared overnight outside Staples Center. Thousands of people who had never met him, standing in the dark, unable to process what had just happened. Kobe was 41 years old. Gianna was 13. The investigation later revealed the pilot had been flying in conditions he was not certified for, and the National Transportation Safety Board blamed the pilot's decision to continue flight under visual flight rules into instrument meteorological conditions. A wrongful death lawsuit dragged on for years. The grief never really ended, but the story was only beginning for 2020, because barely 7 months later, another loss would stun the world in a completely different way. #9 CHADWICK BOSEMAN, August 28, 2020. Nobody knew. That's what made it so shattering. Chadwick Boseman had spent the better part of 4 years quietly fighting stage 3 colon cancer, which progressed to stage 4, while simultaneously giving some of the most physically demanding performances of his career. He suited up as Black Panther. He filmed multiple Marvel blockbusters. He worked out for roles that required peak physical condition. And not a single person outside his closest circle had any idea what he was enduring every time he walked off set. When the announcement came on August 28, 2020, the internet went completely silent before it exploded. His final tweet, a photo of him smiling, posted posthumously by his family, became the most liked tweet in the platform's history at that point. The tributes were immediate and overwhelming. His Ma Rainey's Black Bottom performance, filmed after his diagnosis was already advanced, earned him a posthumous Golden Globe and Screen Actors Guild Award. He was 43 years old. What lingered wasn't just the grief, it was the quiet strength. He had chosen not to make his illness a public story. He kept working, kept showing up, kept being the superhero on and off screen. That decision, which some called deeply private and others called heartbreaking, continues to be debated. What's not debatable is this: Chadwick Boseman knew he was dying and decided to spend that time giving everything he had to his craft. And that says everything about who he was. #8 DMX, April 9, 2021. If there was ever an artist whose entire life felt like a battle between survival and self-destruction, it was Earl Simmons, known to the world as DMX. His music was raw, furious, and deeply spiritual all at once. At his peak in the late 90s and early 2000s, he was the most dominant rapper on the planet, releasing 2 #1 albums in a single year, something no artist had ever done before. But off the stage, DMX was fighting demons that never let go. In early April 2021, he suffered a heart attack at his home in White Plains, New York. Reports at the time suggested it occurred following what was described as a possible OD. He was rushed to the hospital and placed on life support. For nearly a week, fans held vigil outside the hospital, praying, playing his music, refusing to leave. His family released updates daily. On April 9, 2021, DMX passed away. He was 50 years old. The cause of death was listed as cocaine-induced cardiac arrest, a brutal final chapter to a life that had been marked by addiction since he was a teenager. What many people don't know is that, according to those close to him, He had been sober for several stretches in the years before his death, and had spoken openly about his struggles in interviews, documentary footage, and even in the lyrics of his own music. The loss hit the streets hard. Fans gathered in his hometown of Yonkers for a motorcade that stretched for miles. Artists from every genre paid tribute. And for a moment, the whole industry stopped to remember a man who had always told you exactly who he was, even when who he was wasn't easy to look at. But if DMX's story was about a long, painful battle, the next one on this list came out of nowhere. #7, COOLIO, September 28, 2022, he wrote one of the most recognizable songs of the entire 1990s. Gangsta's Paradise wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural moment, a cinematic piece that soundtracked Dangerous Minds and cemented Coolio as one of the most gifted lyricists of his generation. It won a Grammy. It topped charts globally. Decades later, it's still instantly recognizable the second the first note hits. On September 28, 2022, Coolio was found unresponsive on the bathroom floor of a friend's home in Los Angeles. He was 59 years old. Emergency services arrived and could not revive him. The coroner's report later confirmed that the cause of death involved the effects of fentanyl, a detail that, at the time, startled even those who had known him personally. Coolio had spoken in interviews about his past struggles with crack cocaine in the 80s and 90s, a battle he had largely described as behind him. Those close to him told reporters they had no idea the danger he was in. The reaction was immediate and emotional. Coolio had spent much of the years before his death reconnecting with fans through Nostalgia Tour, cooking segments. He had a genuine passion for culinary arts and candid social media appearances. He seemed, by all accounts, happy and at peace with where his life had arrived. That's what made September 28th so gut-wrenching. There were no warning signs. There was no final chapter anyone saw coming. And for those who thought that was shocking, nothing could quite prepare the world for what October 2023 would bring. #6, Sinead O'Connor, July 26, 2023. She was one of the most fearless artists of the 20th century. A voice that could crack you open, and a spirit that refused to be domesticated by the music industry, by the press, or by anyone who told her to fall in line. Sinead O'Connor spent her entire life paying the price for telling the truth before the world was ready to hear it. When her son Shane died by suicide in January 2022, those who loved her feared what it would mean for her. She had always been transparent about her own struggles with mental health. She wrote publicly about her grief, raw, unfiltered posts on social media that read like dispatches from The Edge. On July 26, 2023, Sinead O'Connor was found unresponsive at her home in London. She was 56 years old. The cause of death was later confirmed as natural causes. The tributes that followed were not just about the music, though her music was extraordinary. They were about what she had represented, an artist who had sacrificed enormous commercial success to stay honest. The famous SNL moment from 1992, where she tore up a photo of the Pope on live television, had dogged her for decades. But history, as it often does, caught up with what she had been saying. The church abuse scandals she was protesting became front-page headlines years later. She was right. They just weren't ready. She deserved more time. She deserved more peace. What she got was a legacy that will outlast every critic who ever tried to diminish her. #5, Mattthew Perry, October 28, 2023, Chandler Bing. For a generation of television viewers, that character was more than a role. He was comfort, humor, and the voice of everyone who used jokes to hide how much they were hurting inside. Matthew Perry played Chandler Bing for 10 years on Friends, and in doing so, gave millions of people a piece of themselves they recognized. What most viewers didn't know, what Perry himself described in gut-wrenching detail in his 2022 memoir, was that by the time Friends wrapped, he had already been battling addiction for years. Pills, alcohol, substances of all kinds. He had been to rehab 14 times. He had nearly died from a gastrointestinal perforation that left him in a coma for 2 weeks. He had fought publicly, privately, and in every way imaginable. By October 2023, those close to him believed he was doing better. On October 28, Perry was found unresponsive in the jacuzzi at his Pacific Palisades home. He was 54 years old. The initial reports described it as an apparent drowning. Within weeks, the coroner's report revealed the truth. The cause of death was the acute effects of ketamine, a powerful anesthetic, combined with drowning as a contributing factor. But here's where the story takes a turn most people don't know about. Federal investigators launched a full criminal inquiry. What they uncovered was described as a broad, underground criminal network by the U.S. attorney. 5 people were charged. Among them, 2 doctors, Perry's own personal assistant, and a woman authorities publicly referred to as the ketamine queen. One of the doctors had allegedly written in a text message, "I wonder how much this moron will pay," and was selling Perry vials of ketamine for $2,000 each that cost $12 to produce. Perry's assistant admitted to injecting the actor with ketamine at least 27 times in the final week of his life, including 3 times on the day he died. Perry's last words, reportedly, were, "Shoot me up with a big one." All 5 defendants pleaded guilty. Sentencing stretched well into 2025 and 2026. The ketamine queen received 15 years in federal prison. It wasn't just a tragedy, it was a crime. And the investigation turned what was already a heartbreaking loss into something that felt almost unthinkable. A beloved star surrounded by people who were profiting from his addiction rather than helping him out of it. What happened next that same year would be no less devastating, but came from a completely different direction. #4, TOBYKEITH, February 5, 2024. He was country music's loudest voice, unapologetically patriotic, relentlessly outspoken, and responsible for some of the genre's biggest anthems of the last 3 decades. Should have been a cowboy. Red Solo Cup, courtesy of the red, white, and blue. Toby Keith was not subtle, and he never pretended to be. His fans loved him for it. In 2021, Toby Keith was diagnosed with stomach cancer. He kept it almost entirely private for over a year, a decision that, in retrospect, feels painfully parallel to Chadwick Boseman's quiet battle. When he finally went public with the diagnosis in 2022, he was characteristically direct about it. He had chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery, and he was going to keep fighting. He performed at the Super Bowl tailgate in early 2023. He toured. He kept going. On February 5, 2024, Toby Keith passed away at his home in Moore, Oklahoma, surrounded by family. He was 62 years old. The statement from his family described a man who fought his fight with grace and courage. Country music world stopped. Flags flew at half-staff at venues across the South. Fellow artists flooded social media with tributes to a man who had been a defining force in the genre for over 30 years. He was a complicated figure, politically polarizing, fiercely opinionated, beloved by millions and dismissed by others. But whatever you thought of Toby Keith, the loss of him reminded the world that behind the bravado was a man who fought quietly and hard for 3 years, refusing to surrender, refusing to slow down, and refusing to let cancer take anything from him that he hadn't already decided to give. #3, Liam Payne, October 16, 2024. One Direction was more than a boy band. For an entire generation, they were a formative experience. The first concert, the bedroom posters, the songs that soundtracked early teenage years. And of all 5 members, Liam Payne had perhaps the most complicated path after the group ended. His solo career had mixed results. More visibly, he began documenting his personal struggles with alcohol, with mental health, with the pressures of having been famous since the age of 14. His interviews became increasingly candid. His social media was chaotic. Friends, collaborators, and fans had grown increasingly worried. In October 2024, Liam Payne traveled to Buenos Aires, Argentina. According to hotel staff and witnesses, in the hours before his death, he was reportedly acting erratically in the hotel lobby. He was escorted to his hotel room to prevent a further disturbance. On October 16, Liam Payne fell from the balcony of his 3rd-floor room at the Casa Sur Palermo Hotel. He was 31 years old. The toxicology report that followed confirmed the presence of alcohol, cocaine, and a prescribed antidepressant in his system at the time of his death. 3 people were subsequently charged by Argentine authorities, facing counts of abandonment of a person resulting in death and the supply of narcotics. The grief that followed was global and immediate. One Direction fans organized mass memorial gatherings in dozens of cities. His former bandmates, including Harry Styles, Niall Horan, Louis Tomlinson, and Zayn Malik released individual tributes, each one a reminder of the years they had shared together as teenagers who had no idea what was about to happen to their lives. Liam Payne's death hit hardest because it felt preventable. The signs had been visible for months. The people around him that night made choices that are now the subject of criminal investigation. And a 31-year-old with an entire second chapter ahead of him never got to write it. #2, Richard Simmons. July 13, 2024. He was, in many ways, impossible to describe without sounding reductive. Richard Simmons was a fitness icon, a television personality, and one of the most genuinely compassionate public figures in the history of American entertainment. He spent decades reaching people who the fitness industry had written off, overweight, elderly, disabled, overlooked, and treated them with a warmth that was, by all accounts, completely authentic. In 2014, Simmons abruptly vanished from public life. No more television, no more classes, no more appearances. For 10 years, the world watched and wondered. A wildly popular podcast called Missing Richard Simmons turned the question of where he had gone into a cultural obsession. There were conspiracy theories. There were wellness checks. There were tabloid stories of varying degrees of credibility. His brother Lenny insisted he was fine, just retired, living quietly at peace. On July 13, 2024, the day after his 76th birthday, Richard Simmons was found unresponsive at his home. He died that day. His brother Lenny's public statement asked for celebration rather than sadness. Don't be sad. He was very excited about all of the upcoming ventures he was working on. It emerged that Simmons had been planning a documentary about his life and was in the process of writing a Broadway musical. He had spent a decade in seclusion and then quietly had begun finding his way back. He just ran out of time. The tragedy is simple. He was on his way back, and the world never got to see it. #1, a generation lost. When you step back and look at this list, really look at it, what you see is something bigger than a collection of shocking headlines. You see a pattern. Chadwick Boseman fought his battle in secret, carrying an impossible weight because he couldn't bear to let anyone down. Matthew Perry had an entire network of people around him, and some of them were selling him the drugs that killed him. DMX fought addiction his whole life in public, honestly and without pretense, and the world cheered for him and watched him struggle simultaneously. Liam Payne had been showing the warning signs for months, and the people who should have protected him on that final night allegedly didn't. Fame, it turns out, doesn't come with a safety net. In many cases, it actively removes the ones you might otherwise have had. The stories of the last 5 years aren't just about grief. They're about what happens to extraordinary human beings when the systems built around them, the handlers, the enablers, the yes-men, the opportunists, fail them at the worst possible moment. Kobe Bryant was just a father taking his daughter to a basketball game, and even that wasn't safe. The celebrities on this list lived out loud, gave everything they had, and left behind work that will outlast every headline. But their deaths leave behind a question that doesn't have an easy answer. How much of what we called the price of fame was actually just people failing to look out for each other? If any of these stories stayed with you, drop a comment below with whose story hit hardest. And if you want more deep dives like this, you already know what to do.